I will now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 27, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin. Deputy, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Lascion Corla. Taoiseach, before the last general election, Minister Reilly personally led a deeply cynical campaign on health promises and health issues. He promised across the length and breadth of the country that he and Fine Gael would make sure that no one lost any services, and a whole set of new services, new free services, would be provided. Upon appointment, Minister Reilly announced the abolition of the management structures of the health services, and that he was taking personal charge, and they've been leaderless and lacking governance ever since. He announced that waiting lists would come down, prescriptions would be cheaper, and free GP care for all was on the way. Since then, waiting lists are up, prescriptions are just as expensive, and free GP care extension is nowhere to be seen, despite being announced on numerous occasions. He presented a false and dishonest budget last year to the House. He was repeatedly warned about this and alerted about the crippling situation in relation to health finances, but he did absolutely nothing except repeat the mantra that frontline services would be protected, while he was already implementing disproportionate and unfair cuts on the most vulnerable. Taoiseach, there's a deep sense of despair across the health sector, in hospitals and in community care across the country. And members of your own government, as well as backbenchers, have been quoted left, right, back and centre across the media, criticising Minister Reilly, and particularly his recent announcements in relation to cuts to those with disabilities. They described those cuts in that announcement as a catastrophe, regrettable. And one Labour minister was accused of saying he should have had I'll translate, the Lee Rody to announce the cuts himself and not hide behind one of these HSE lackeys. And Taoiseach, there's no precedent for a situation where a Taoiseach praises a minister for being brave in reversing cuts, while the minister simultaneously is still claiming that the cuts never actually happened. Minister Shortall, at least, has been honest about Minister Reilly's failure to manage the health budget by not, for example, negotiating a new agreement with the pharmaceutical sector. She even offered to chair those negotiations herself, but she wrote to him on July the 27th asking for a report and saying that she had no delegated statutory authority in relation to primary care, and that she hadn't been consulted in relation to any matter pertaining to the budget. And I would put it to you this, Taoiseach, that Minister Shortall was asked specifically, had she confidence in Minister Reilly on a number of occasions, on Newstalk, Morning Ireland and Newsprint. So was Minister Burton, and so was Minister Jan O'Sullivan in Newsprint. And they all refused to say, very simply, I have confidence in Minister James Reilly. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, is Minister Shortall correct in saying that the government's commitment to health reform is genuinely being questioned because of his lack of proactive engagement with the issues?
Thank you,
and can you comment on reports that there are going to be numerous cutbacks in hospitals? And could you outline to the House how hospital deficits are going to be dealt with between now and December? And if he's aware of planned closure of wards across the country.
You're anticipating the motion of no confidence tabled by your party in Minister Reilly. I think you had some kind of a thinking there in the last couple of days, because I seem to have heard this comment in this statement already from you. Now, you did make 3 points. That you said that Minister Reilly introduced a deeply cynical budget, which I reject. You made 3 points, that he committed to waiting lists would come down, that prescriptions would be cheaper, and that free GP care was on the way. You know the 3 charges that you made, and you have repeated them on numerous occasions. Now, I think it's reasonable to say, Deputy Martin, that nobody would be in a position to clear up the extent of the mess that was left behind after you removed yourselves, or were removed by the people from these benches. But for your information, in regard to waiting list progress, for instance, a reduction of 22% in the number of patients waiting on trolleys between January and September of this year, compared to the same period last year. That equates to 13,450 fewer patients waiting on trolleys. In addition to that, the number of adults having to wait for more than 12 months for inpatient and day case surgery is down by 85%, and the number waiting more than 9 months is down by 63%. Now, they're not cynical allegations, they're facts, actually. In respect of cheaper prescriptions, and the legislation regarding reference pricing for drugs was introduced into the Fianna in July, and it recommences there tomorrow. The committee and remaining stages of the Health Pricing and Supply of Medical Goods Bill are being taken tomorrow. And let me assure Deputy Martin and everybody else that given the extent of legislation published and introduced in the House in the last period, this is a priority for this session, and it starts again tomorrow. And in regard to free GP care, this is a little behind time, I admit. The legislation agenda is published today. This is on the A list. Can take a government consider this. It is a priority, and work continues on that bill to get it in here as quickly as we can, so that the extension of free GP care can be extended to persons with prescribed illnesses. And in addition to that, Deputy Martin, legislation to abolish restrictions on GPs wishing to become contractors under the GMS scheme is now in place. Now, there are the three issues that you raised. There are the three issues that you bombarded your party with, that you're thinking, and there are your answers.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Supplementary question, Deputy Micheál.
Fundamentally, Taoiseach, I asked you two core questions. One, is Minister Shortall, does she have genuine confidence in Minister Reilly? That's the question I asked you. And that relates to a very fractious correspondence that occurred between Minister Reilly and Minister Shortall in July and May, when Minister Shortall confirmed that despite seeking delegated authority in relation to primary care, she had been frustrated time and time again by Minister Reilly. And furthermore, Taoiseach, I said, not that his budget was cynical, I said his election campaigning was cynical. That's what I said. I said his budget was false and dishonest. Because like Minister Shortall, and I agree with her, he penciled in 124 million for pharmaceuticals, he penciled in another 140 for health insurance companies, and he penciled in another 100 million for halving of agency staff, and didn't do a single thing in relation to any of those in the first 8 months of this year, and knowing full well that those targets were not realisable. That's why I've charged that it was a false budget, and that is what has put the health service into the crisis it currently is this year in terms of finances. And Taoiseach, again I would say to you, you mentioned waiting lists. The cynical thing he did on waiting lists was he changed the targets and the timelines. World benchmarks are 3 months and 6 months. He went out to 12 months and 9 months.
Question,
but there was very few people above, and then he quotes percentages. But the key targets and objectives, for example, of the Treatment Purchase Fund and its achievements down through the years, was dramatically reducing those over 3 months and over 6 months. And since he has come to office, Minister Reilly, those waiting lists have escalated, have gone through the roof in relation to that. But I want to finally say to you, Taoiseach,
question,
Taoiseach, I mean, it's not just on this side of the House, Taoiseach, that people have deep misgivings about how Minister Reilly is acting. And I quote for you one Labour minister who said, "Several times I've tried to work with him on a number of things, and he appears to be so partisan that if you're not one of his cronies, he doesn't want to know." I don't have that problem with any other Fine Gael minister, one Labour minister said. He should. I would have some respect for him, but it was so expletive, deleted, cowardly. And for the amount of money involved, the heat we're all going to get from this is farcical, said another Labour minister. The first I heard of the cuts was the HSE announcement, said Minister of State Sean Sherlock. Everyone else has managed to live with Croke Park and keep within budget. What is so special about James Reilly? Asked another senior figure this weekend. I'd ask you, Taoiseach, to read any newspaper in the last 3 weeks. The benches here deserted that man in droves over the last number of weeks.
Thank you.
And left him isolated because of his mismanagement of the health services.
Thank you, Deputy.
And I would put it to you, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy.
It is unprecedented. It is unprecedented that when ministers are asked a very simple question, do you have confidence in a fellow colleague or not, that a senior minister, Minister Burton, the Minister Jan O'Sullivan and Minister Roisin Shortall could not articulate confidence in a senior colleague.
Thank you, Deputy.
That's the bottom line.
Taoiseach.
So I think, Taoiseach, you would be well advised not to be attacking this side of the House for basically reflecting what is unfortunately and regrettably a common refrain across this House, irrespective of party or constituency, in terms of the management of the health service in 2012.
I will call on the Taoiseach. Final reply. Order, please.
I think for Deputy Micheál Martin to come into the House here on the resumption of parliamentary business and talk about cynicism and misleading information and misleading comments, was it not? Do you belong to a party that said that the people of this country would have the cheapest bailout in history? Did I hear that from you? Do you bear that brand on your forehead? The cheapest bailout, the cheapest bailout in history?
Order, please.
See, you never bothered. You never bothered.
Deputy.
You never bothered.
Deputy.
You never bothered.
Deputy, this leader's question. Deputy.
You never actually bothered, Deputy Martin, to look at what you created when you set up the original structure of the HSE. You never bothered to look at it. And I want to tell you something now.
Please, stop it. Deputy.
First of all, the only reason you want to take the course you're now taking is that you're terrified of the party on your right-hand side. And your opportunism knows no bounds.
I think you're terrified of proposing your
Things take place this evening and tomorrow, and there'll be a vote on that. And you can be assured of the Minister and his Ministers of State speaking in his defence, and the Fine Gael party and the Labour Party supporting the work of the Minister for Health as he goes about his duties insofar as his remit is concerned here. I want to say this to you, Deputy Martin. I will. Go down to look at what you created and the consequence of it. Go down to that town in my own county, in Kilchimar.
I'll
go down and look at
options, please.
Promised them left, right, and centre teachers you were caught out on a tape and the square. You swore blind in here, you said you gave them no promise. Tape recorder appears when you're voted, making a very definitive contract.
Go down and speak to the proprietor of Home Care Medicals and walk into the warehouse, Deputy Martin. There is at least €3 million worth of equipment in that warehouse that has not been used for 3 years because of the bureaucracy that you set up when the HSE was implemented in the first place. Each piece of that equipment, Deputy Martin, has been decontaminated, has been packed, has been barcoded, and simply because of the structure that you set up, people all over the country have not been able to access beds, or hoists, or wheelchairs. We had an endless recurring purchasing within the structure of the HSE. Go down and have a look at it. And that's going to change because I informed Minister Reilly of it last night. Do you realise, Deputy Martin, do you realise that a mattress, do you realise that a mattress for one of these beds costs €1,000?
Are we going to say some more Deputy Martin? Can you confirm that? I asked you that question. Can you confirm that?
In their own homes, who are currently waiting for these beds? The structure that you set up, you never bothered to look at the monster that you created, and that's all going to change now. Let me repeat again for you. You raised 3 points. Waiting lists down 22%. That's 13,450 patients in the last 12 months. Day surgery down 85%, and those waiting more than 9 months down by 63%. The legislation is back at the Senate tomorrow for cheaper prescriptions and in here as quickly as we can. And in respect of GP care, that legislation is a priority. You'll have your vote of confidence and you'll see the results.